while back, I'd gotten into a conversation with a young gentleman who probably was quite left-wing in his politics. I wasn't entirely sure, but he had made certain statements, and that happened to be the conclusion that I'd drawn. And during the course of this conversation, we ended up talking about Schopenhauer, or Arthur Schopenhauer in English, the famous German philosopher, famous for a lot of things, but most famously he wrote an essay entitled On Women. That would be the translation. And generally speaking, the consensus on this particular essay is that it's very misogynistic and bad and blah, blah, blah. Now, given normative standards, that's probably true. But I also told them that I think there are some insights in the essay that are worthwhile and worth paying attention to. Anyway, one thing led to another, and the conversation turned into something different, primarily into a discussion about the role and importance of feminism. And without going into all the details, I made the point, and he was a bit shocked by this, that I thought that feminism was essentially a technological inevitability, which is to say that one way or another, we were going to get some version of feminism, and that although it seems much more likely when you initially look at something like feminism that it's probably a political movement and this and that, and of course all these things were political movements, that at its root, it has something much more visceral, which in this case is technology empowering women, allowing them to move past certain limitations that had not existed before. And this speaks to a broader conception, a broader point. Have you ever asked yourself, for example, why we have something called a culture war to begin with? Why are we arguing about minutia, about quote-unquote marginalized groups, and things that don't readily seem to make sense or even seem terribly important at times? Well, there's actually a good reason for that. And it's probably not the reasons you hear commonly, although they're part of it, right? You can talk about various political waves and movements that occurred in the 20th century. You can talk about bills and political agendas. Yes, that's all true. But why does it happen? Well, to my mind, there's a good answer to this. The answer being a gentleman called Alexis de Tocqueville, or Alexis de Tocqueville in French, who you might have heard of because he was a famous writer, philosopher, sociologist, and a diplomat from France who visited the United States in the early mid-19th century and made certain key observations in concert with his visits. And he wrote a lot. And one thing that he commented on, which he doesn't refer to directly as such, but talks about in his volume called Democracy in America, which was published in 1840, is the Tocqueville effect, or the Tocqueville Paradox, which is basically this idea, this phenomenon by which you can observe that as social conditions and opportunities, the environment improves, social frustration within said environment grows much more rapidly. Which is to say, you reach one benchmark in terms of satisfaction, specifically with respect to social opportunities, employment opportunities, general freedom. What happens as a result of that is that you have to push the envelope further. And this, of course, is in its essence essentially what progressivism is, but not exclusively, because everything, especially left-wing, but not entirely, tends to veer in that direction. It's just that with progressivism, it's much more rapid, it's much more in your face, it's much more demanding. But basically, whenever you've reached a benchmark, let's say equal rights between men and women, that becomes insufficient and you need to move further past that benchmark to something where you would say that exceeds the equality or the whatever you want to call it. And that's in essence what the Tocqueville effect is. And returning to my point about feminism being essentially a technological inevitability, you can kind of look at the Tocqueville effect or Tocqueville paradox in that sense, because along with technological developments, and I think it goes hand in hand with the Tocqueville effect, you're guaranteed to get more dissatisfaction the more things progress in terms of social opportunities, social satisfaction, etc., etc. Now, it's not that it happens from one day to the next day, although it can, because usually there's some kind of equilibrium, people are contented. A lot of people, just as an example, might cite the 1990s, say, in Pax Americana society as such an example. Think about it. The 90s were pretty good. You had just enough technology. Things seemed to be going well for a good number of people overall, and so on and so forth. And then along come the 2000s, well, specifically 9/11, that changes a lot of things, but a lot of other developments occur in addition. So in many ways, the various streams, political, cultural, etc., that have emerged over the last couple of decades are responsible in some broad sense for what's happening. But at its root, at its core, we're talking about a much more visceral phenomenon that occurs across most societies. Now, you could make the argument that it's limited to Western society, and maybe that's true, but we don't have enough data on other societies. And if you observe things occurring, particularly in places like South Korea or even China, which are pretty advanced, which are achieving a lot of the same things that occurred in the West, then I think it's probably a universal observation. You'd have to see most nations of the world reach the same levels of technological development and progress as the West, but I think it's likely to be the case. And I think it would be useful to actually quote where this comes from his Democracy in America. So Alexis de Tocqueville states, "The hatred that men bear to privilege increases in proportion as privileges become fewer and less considerable, so that democratic passions would seem to burn most fiercely just when they have least fuel. I have already given the reason for this phenomenon. When all conditions are unequal, no inequality is so great as to offend the eye, whereas the slightest dissimilarity is odious in the midst of general uniformity. The more complete this uniformity is, the more insupportable the sight of such a difference becomes. Hence it is natural that the love of equality should constantly increase together with equality itself, and that it should grow by what it feeds on." So you see in essence what the issue is. Basically, it's something that's inevitable given certain developments in society. Now, he didn't mention technology explicitly, but I also think that technology aids and abets this, because technology itself doesn't have, say, a political or cultural agenda, but it certainly accelerates all of this, which we've all borne witness to online. Whether it's something like fat acceptance, the existence of people that think they're actually animals, the confusion about gender, the constant talk about marginalized groups, it can never, ever be good enough. Of course, as I mentioned, you see this as personified in the progressive movement, but that's just the most extreme version of it. This is just broadly and generally true across all developed societies. Now, this hypothesis, if hypothesis you wish to call it, runs counter to a lot of what you might hear on the right side of things, conservative narratives and what have you, because such people are very unwilling to accept such an idea. But whether we like it or not, I think we just have, to be blunt, a preponderance of evidence for this, that basically the better things get, the more likely people are to complain about the state of the world. And to his point, if things are absolutely horrific and things suck, you're much less likely to home in on that and be upset because, well, everything in your life sucks. If only 10% of your life sucks, but the rest is great, you're going to be much more fixated and focused on that remaining 10%, and you're going to want to improve that. And so what does this tell us about the state of affairs these days, gentlemen? It tells us, unfortunately, that this was all probably inevitable to varying degrees. No one in the West has escaped this. I think it's a matter of time in other parts of the world that are developing or have already developed, although there are certain cultural barriers in place in various places. That is just a matter of time until those barriers are lifted and they decide to embrace the same principles that the rest of the world has, if this indeed is true. And I think, as I said, there's a lot of evidence for it. So brace yourself. There is no limit to what we've seen thus far. Anyway, as always, thank you for tuning in. Many special thanks to my patrons. You guys are the best. You are the bulwark against the darkness of YouTube. Many, many special thanks to you, as well as to my donors on PayPal. And for everybody else, if you can leave a like, share, comment, subscribe, I hear it helps. It'd be much appreciated. I'll check you out next time if I'm still alive. May the gods watch over you. Bye-bye for now. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.